The Nexus Prime Military Institute floated in the void like a monument to organized paranoia, its angular surfaces bristling with enough weaponry to glass a small moon and sufficient bureaucracy to bore it into submission first. The orbital fortress discipline had been designed by committee, which explained why it looked like someone had taken a perfectly functional military base and then asked 17 different species to just add a few improvements. The result was architectural chaos, held together by gravity generators and mutual stubbornness. Deep within this testament to galactic cooperation gone wrong, Commander Vexthal was conducting what the curriculum optimistically called strategic warfare theory. The crystalline being's faceted form caught the harsh overhead lighting as he gestured toward a holographic display showing battle formations that had been outdated since the Third Galactic Unpleasantness. His voice resonated through the amphitheater with the musical quality that made his species excellent at both military instruction and dinner party entertainment, though never simultaneously. The classroom itself represented everything that was both impressive and insufferable about galactic military education. 49 seats arranged in perfect geometric precision, each equipped with enough technology to run a small space station, all focused on absorbing knowledge that would be obsolete by the time these cadets saw actual combat. The students, handpicked from the galaxy's finest military families, sat in their assigned positions like expensive chess pieces, waiting for someone to explain the rules of a game they'd never actually play. Seat 43 Amperes occupied the back corner, positioned with the kind of deliberate isolation that suggested its occupant had somehow offended the Academy's seating algorithm. This corner had become known among faculty as the reconsideration zone, where cadets who showed insufficient enthusiasm for military excellence were placed to contemplate their career choices. The current occupant of this prestigious location was busy confirming the seating system's low opinion of him by sketching what appeared to be technical diagrams in the margins of his tactical theory textbook. Dex Thornfield possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that made him perfect for maintenance work and terrible for military recruiting posters. His brown hair refused to conform to regulation standards despite multiple attempts at correction, and his uniform bore the subtle wrinkles that suggested its wearer spent more time thinking about equipment failures than parade formations. His face carried the expression of someone perpetually calculating load tolerances and power consumption rates, which made him appear either deeply thoughtful or mildly confused, depending on the observer's charitable inclinations. The human's presence at the Academy had been something of an administrative accident, the result of a bureaucratic mix-up that had somehow interpreted essential personnel transfer as military academy enrollment. His protests that he was a maintenance engineer, not officer material, had been dismissed as false modesty by beings who couldn't conceive of someone not wanting to pursue military glory. The fact that he kept showing up to classes and completing assignments had been taken as evidence of eventual adjustment rather than simple confusion about how to leave. Commander Vexthal continued his lecture with the enthusiasm of someone who had given the same speech so many times it had achieved the status of religious ritual. The essence of strategic thinking, he proclaimed, his crystalline features shifting through various colors to emphasize important points, lies in anticipating your opponent's psychological responses to tactical pressure. Consider the recent successes of anonymous Operative 43 Amperes in the Outer Rim sectors. At this mention, exactly one person in the room shifted uncomfortably, though the movement was so slight it could have been attributed to poor circulation rather than personal recognition. The operative in question had become something of a legend in military circles, a mysterious figure who had supposedly prevented 3 major enemy offensives through innovative tactical approaches that defied conventional analysis. The Proxima Nebula incident alone, the commander continued, apparently unaware that his subject was currently calculating whether the classroom's air recycling system was operating at optimal efficiency, demonstrates a level of strategic thinking that challenges our fundamental understanding of human tactical capabilities. The irony of this statement was lost on everyone except the universe itself, which had developed quite an appreciation for situational comedy over its lengthy existence. The true story of the Proxima Nebula incident involved a malfunctioning coffee machine, 3 hours of routine maintenance, and a complete misunderstanding of cause and effect that had somehow prevented an alien invasion fleet from coordinating their attack. The morning might have continued in this educational vein, had it not been interrupted by what could only be described as entirely too much ceremony for a Tuesday. The classroom's main entrance, designed to open with dignified silence, instead erupted inward like a small explosion of military protocol. 6 members of the Imperial Courier Squadron marched through the doorway in perfect formation, their dress uniforms so heavily decorated they could have doubled as small armor plating. General Crix Mandor led the procession with the kind of bearing that suggested he had never met a situation that couldn't be improved by adding more formality to it. His 6 arms moved in precise coordination as he consulted a tablet that probably contained enough classified information to start several wars. His reptilian features had been arranged in an expression of ceremonial gravity that would have been impressive if it weren't slightly undermined by the obvious confusion in his eyes. Commander Vextal's lecture ground to a halt with all the grace of a cargo hauler hitting an asteroid field. His crystalline form shifted through several shades of what might have been annoyance as he processed this unexpected disruption to his carefully scheduled academic routine. "General," he said, his musical voice carrying a note that suggested this interruption had better be worth the dramatic entrance, "I wasn't aware we had any ceremonial obligations scheduled for this morning." The general's response carried the weight of someone who had clearly rehearsed this moment, but hadn't quite expected it to feel. "This awkward. We're here for the recipient designated as Seat 43 Ampers," he announced, his voice projecting across the amphitheater with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Anonymous Operative Chtajeshi Tria. Step forward to receive recognition for services to galactic security." The silence that followed this announcement was the kind that suggested the universe was waiting for someone to explain the punchline. 48 pairs of eyes, representing 23 different species and approximately 47 different ways of expressing bewilderment, turned toward the back corner, where Dex Thornfield sat frozen, like a small animal caught in the headlights of an approaching starfreighter. Now would be an excellent time to explain how exactly a maintenance engineer from the outer colonies had ended up in the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy, about to receive recognition for heroism he'd never intended to commit. The story, like most stories involving bureaucracy and accidental competence, began with broken equipment and ended with everyone misunderstanding what had actually happened. 6 months earlier, Dex Thornfield had been living what he considered a perfectly satisfactory existence as a maintenance engineer on deep space. Station Omega-7. His responsibilities included keeping the coffee machines operational, ensuring the waste disposal systems functioned properly, and maintaining the gravity generators that prevented everyone from floating around like confused balloons. These were not glamorous duties, but they were essential, and Dex took considerable pride in the fact that nothing under his care had exploded unexpectedly in over 3 years. The Proxima Nebula incident had begun, like most disasters, with a seemingly minor malfunction. The station's coffee machine had developed what engineers call an attitude problem, producing beverages that tasted like recycled coolant and occasionally emitting sparks that suggested imminent catastrophe. Dex had approached this challenge with the methodical patience that made him excellent at his job and completely unsuitable for military service. What he hadn't known was that the coffee machine's malfunction was actually the result of enemy sabotage. The hegemony forces had infiltrated the station's systems weeks earlier, planning to disable critical infrastructure during their surprise attack. The coffee machine had been rigged to overload the station's power grid at precisely the moment their fleet arrived, leaving the defenders blind and helpless. Dex's repair work had been routine by his standards: trace the power fluctuations, identify the faulty components, replace what needed replacing, and test everything twice to make sure it worked properly. The fact that his methodical troubleshooting had systematically dismantled an enemy sabotage operation was entirely accidental. When he'd finally gotten the coffee machine working again, producing beverages that met his exacting standards for caffeination, he'd unknowingly prevented the station's communication array from being compromised. The Hegemony attack fleet had arrived on schedule, expecting to find a crippled station and easy prey. Instead, they'd encountered a fully operational defense network and a communication system that immediately broadcast their location to every military installation in the sector. The resulting counterattack had been swift and decisive, leaving the enemy fleet scattered and their invasion plans in ruins. The military analysts who studied the engagement had concluded that anonymous operative 43 Amperes had demonstrated unprecedented tactical awareness by identifying and neutralizing the enemy's primary strategic advantage before they could use it. The fact that this tactical awareness had consisted of wanting better coffee had never occurred to anyone, largely because no one had thought to ask the maintenance engineer what he'd actually been doing. The vegan trade route liberation had followed a similar pattern of accidental heroism. Dex had been assigned to routine maintenance on the waste disposal system at Junction Station Alpha, a task that required him to recalibrate the magnetic containment fields and ensure proper gravitational flow dynamics. It was the kind of work that needed to be done regularly, but that everyone preferred to ignore until it became absolutely necessary. What he hadn't known was that a pirate fleet had been using the station's waste disposal schedule to time their attacks on commercial shipping. The pirates had infiltrated the station's systems and modified the disposal protocols to create predictable gravitational disturbances that would force merchant vessels out of hyperspace at predetermined locations. It was an elegant plan that had been working perfectly for months. Dex's maintenance work had followed standard procedures: check the magnetic field generators, test the gravitational compensators, run full system diagnostics, and optimize everything for maximum efficiency. His improvements to the disposal system had eliminated the gravitational disturbances that the pirates had been using as a trap, while his optimization protocols had actually enhanced the system's performance beyond manufacturer specifications. The pirate fleet's next attack had been a complete disaster. Their carefully timed ambush had failed when the gravitational anomaly they'd been counting on never materialized. Instead, they'd found themselves trying to intercept ships that were traveling through stable hyperspace corridors at maximum efficiency. The resulting chase had led them directly into a patrol fleet that had been attracted by their energy signatures. Military intelligence had credited anonymous operative 43 Amperes with developing an innovative counter-piracy strategy that used waste management systems as a tactical advantage. The analysis had praised his understanding of gravitational dynamics and his ability to turn routine infrastructure into strategic assets. The fact that he'd just been trying to make the toilets work better had been too mundane for anyone to consider. The miracle at Tau Ceti had been the most spectacular misunderstanding of all. Dex had been performing routine maintenance on the gravity generators at Research Station Beta when he'd noticed some unusual fluctuations in the temporal field regulators. The fluctuations hadn't been dangerous, just inefficient, and his engineering instincts had compelled him to investigate and correct the problem. The temporal field regulators were standard equipment on most research stations, designed to maintain stable time flow in areas where exotic physics experiments might cause chronological irregularities. They were reliable systems that rarely needed adjustment, which was why no one had noticed that these particular regulators had been gradually drifting out of calibration for several months. Dex's repair work had involved recalibrating the field generators, updating the synchronization protocols, and running comprehensive tests to ensure everything was operating within normal parameters. It had been routine work that had taken him most of a day to complete properly, with a kind of methodical attention to detail that made him excellent at maintenance and completely invisible to everyone else. What he hadn't known was that an enemy fleet had been using the temporal distortions around the station as cover for their approach. The gradually increasing chronological irregularities had created a kind of time shadow that concealed their ships from conventional sensors. They'd been planning to use this temporal camouflage to launch a surprise attack on the research facility and capture its experimental technology. When Dex had fixed the temporal field regulators, he'd eliminated the chronological distortions that had been hiding the enemy fleet. The ships had suddenly become visible to every sensor array in the system, appearing on tactical displays like targets in a shooting gallery. The defensive fleet's response had been immediate and overwhelming, catching the attackers completely off guard and destroying their formation before they could adapt to their new circumstances. The military analysis of this engagement had credited anonymous operative 43 Amperes with developing revolutionary temporal warfare tactics that demonstrated an unprecedented understanding of chronological physics. The report had praised his ability to manipulate time itself as a strategic weapon, turning temporal distortions into tactical advantages. The fact that he'd just been trying to make the gravity generators run more efficiently had been too simple for anyone to believe. Back in the present moment, General Kriegsmandor was consulting his tablet with the kind of intensity usually reserved for disarming explosive devices. According to our records, he announced to the increasingly uncomfortable classroom, the individual designated as Seat 43 Amperes is the recipient of the Galactic Cross of Excellence, the Medal of Strategic Innovation, and the Order of Temporal Mastery. He paused, his reptilian features shifting through several expressions as he prepared for the ceremonial climax. These decorations are awarded in recognition of 3 separate tactical victories that prevented major enemy offensives and saved countless lives. The silence that followed this announcement was the kind that suggested reality was taking a moment to reconsider its fundamental assumptions. 48 pairs of eyes, representing the finest military minds of their respective species, focused on the human in Seat 43 Amperes, who looked like he was seriously considering the feasibility of digging a tunnel through the deck plating. Commander Vexthal's crystalline form had stopped shifting colors entirely, a sign that his cognitive processes were operating at maximum capacity while trying to reconcile the data. His faceted eyes swiveled between his teaching materials, which included detailed analyses of anonymous operative 43 Amperes' tactical innovations, and the unremarkable human who had spent the semester turning in maintenance reports instead of strategic assessments. "You," the commander said, his musical voice carrying a note of something that might have been accusation if crystals were capable of such emotions, "are the tactical genius who revolutionized our understanding of infrastructure warfare." Dex Thornfield, who had spent 6 months hoping this moment would never arrive, managed what could generously be called a shrug. "I fix things," he said, as if this explained everything. Which, from his perspective, it absolutely did. The general, clearly expecting this moment to involve more ceremony and less existential confusion, consulted his tablet again. "The records indicate that you prevented 3 major enemy offensives through innovative applications of maintenance protocols that demonstrated unprecedented strategic thinking. Equipment was malfunctioning," Dex replied, maintaining the same tone he might use to discuss optimal wrench maintenance. "I fixed it so it would work properly." This explanation, delivered with all the passion of someone reading a repair manual, seemed to break something fundamental in the general's understanding of military heroics. His 6 arms moved in what might have been confusion as he processed the idea that galactic security had been preserved by someone who viewed enemy invasions as equipment failures. The other cadets, meanwhile, were experiencing their own philosophical crisis. For months, they had dismissed the human as unremarkable, possibly even deficient by galactic military standards. The revelation that this ordinary-looking being had accomplished what entire fleets had failed to achieve was forcing them to reconsider several fundamental assumptions about the nature of tactical excellence. Cadet Nixidor, a Centaurian whose blue-scaled features had been arranged in permanent superiority since hatching, raised a clawed appendage. "But the strategic analyses of your operations show unprecedented innovation in using civilian infrastructure as military assets. How did you develop such unconventional tactical thinking?" Dex considered this question with the same methodical approach he applied to diagnostic procedures. If something's broken, you find out why it's broken, and then you fix it so it works the way it's supposed to work. "The temporal manipulation at Tau Ceti," pressed Cadet Vorthian, whose crystalline features betrayed genuine curiosity despite his species' reputation for intellectual arrogance. "Your use of chronological distortions as a tactical weapon has been studied by our finest theoretical physicists. The field regulators were out of calibration, Dex explained patiently. They needed to be synchronized properly, or the gravity generators wouldn't work efficiently. General Krixmander, apparently deciding that ceremony must proceed regardless of philosophical implications, gestured to his honor guard. 4 soldiers stepped forward, carrying display cases containing medals that gleamed with the kind of light usually associated with neutron stars. Cadet Thornfield, he announced, by order of the Galactic Military Command, you are hereby awarded these decorations in recognition of your extraordinary service to galactic security. The ceremony that followed had all the dignity of formal military tradition, combined with the surreal quality of everyone involved, realizing they were participating in an elaborate cosmic joke. The medals, each worth more than most planets' annual defense budgets, were pinned to Dex's uniform, while he stood at attention and tried not to think about whether the Academy's ventilation system was operating at optimal efficiency. Commander Vex Fall, meanwhile, was experiencing what could only be described as an academic identity crisis. His carefully prepared lectures on strategic theory suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with someone who had proven that practical competence was more valuable than theoretical knowledge. The crystalline being's form shifted through several confused colors as he tried to reconcile military doctrine with maintenance procedures. Perhaps, the commander ventured, his musical voice uncertain for the first time in decades, you could share your insights on the practical application of infrastructure-based tactical thinking. Dex looked at him with the expression of someone who had been asked to explain quantum mechanics using interpretive dance. Check your equipment regularly, he said finally. If something's not working the way it should, figure out why and fix it properly. And always run full diagnostics after you make repairs. This wisdom, delivered with all the profundity of a maintenance checklist, was dutifully recorded by 23 different note-taking devices as the other cadets tried to understand how such simple advice could reshape galactic military doctrine. The general, having completed his ceremonial duty, seemed uncertain how to conclude what was probably the strangest medal presentation in military history. The Galactic Command looks forward to your continued contributions to strategic innovation, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what form those contributions might take. I just want to finish my classes and go back to fixing things, Dex replied, apparently unaware that this statement had just redefined several career counselors' understanding of professional ambition. As the Imperial Courier Squadron filed out with considerably less certainty than they'd arrived with, the classroom was left to contemplate the philosophical implications of what they'd witnessed. Here was someone who had achieved legendary status not through strategic brilliance or tactical innovation, but through the simple application of competent maintenance procedures to problems that no one else had recognized as equipment failures. The other cadets began looking at their human classmate with a mixture of awe and bewilderment that would probably persist for the remainder of their military careers. They had spent months studying theoretical approaches to strategic problems while sitting next to someone who had solved the ultimate strategic problems by treating them as maintenance issues. Commander Vexathal, attempting to salvage what remained of his lecture, cleared his throat with a sound like wind chimes in an earthquake. Perhaps we should examine the psychological factors that contributed to the success of these infrastructure-based tactical approaches, he suggested, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Most equipment failures are caused by poor maintenance or incorrect operation, Dex said, as if this explained everything about military psychology that anyone could possibly need to know. Which, the universe reflected with its characteristic sense of irony, it probably did. The class resumed with everyone pretending that nothing fundamental had changed, though the medals now adorning Dex's uniform caught the light in ways that made it impossible to ignore their presence. He remained in seat 43 amperes, listened to Commander Vexthal's renewed discussion of strategic theory, and continued to think about optimal maintenance schedules and proper diagnostic procedures with the same focus that had accidentally preserved galactic civilization. The irony was not lost on the universe that the most celebrated tactical innovator in recent galactic history wanted nothing more than to return to the mundane routine of keeping equipment working properly. But then again, The universe had long since learned that the best jokes were often the ones where nobody realized the punchline until it was too late to stop laughing. As the class period drew to a close, Dex Thornfield remained in seat 43 amperes, now officially recognized as a strategic genius, unofficially regarded as a phenomenon, and personally convinced that military education was considerably less practical than learning proper equipment maintenance procedures. The medals on his chest reflected the classroom lights as he packed his repair manuals and prepared for his next class, where he would undoubtedly continue to disappoint instructors who expected tactical innovations and instead received maintenance schedules applied with engineering precision. The galaxy, meanwhile, continued to rotate around its various axes, blissfully unaware that its newest military legend was primarily concerned with whether the Academy's gravity generators were properly calibrated, and whether anyone had bothered to check the coffee machine's power consumption recently. Some heroes, the universe noted with considerable satisfaction, were considerably more practical than anyone expected them to be.